3:59 a.m. local time, Norwegian Sea. Inside the Combat Information Center of a U.S. aircraft carrier, sonar picked up something that had no business being there. It wasn't biologics, it wasn't merchant traffic, it wasn't a surface echo bouncing off the seafloor. It was a submerged contact, quiet, holding depth, just a few miles from the formation. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The sonar operator adjusted his headset, eyes locked on the waterfall display, watching the thin line that had just appeared on the trace. Submerged contacts in that stretch of ocean were usually sorted out fast: marine life, thermal layers, or Allied submarines transiting on a coordinated schedule. This one didn't fit any of those boxes. Submerged contact, bearing 210, preliminary classification unidentified, the operator said, not taking his eyes off the console. The anti-submarine warfare officer leaned in over the screen. The acoustic signature was too clean for biologics and too disciplined for a sloppy conventional submarine. It had the kind of silence only a well-trained crew maintains underwater. The carrier is never alone. Around it, destroyers and frigates formed a multi-layer protective ring, hull-mounted and towed sonar sweeping the depths constantly, built for exactly this kind of moment when a contact shows up out of nowhere and nobody yet knows what it intends to do. On the bridge, the officer of the deck took the report over a short internal line. CIC reports unidentified submerged contact, estimated range 15 nautical miles. The captain's voice didn't change. Confirm classification. Activate active sonar on the nearest escorts. No fanfare. The lead frigate in the screen switched on its hull-mounted sonar. The ping spread through the dark water, bouncing back with an echo far too defined to be rock, sediment, or a school of fish. Contact confirmed, mechanical signature consistent with a nuclear-powered submarine, the ASW officer reported. Inside the operations room, the mood shifted instantly. This wasn't a sonar anomaly anymore. It was a Russian submarine deliberately positioned within detection range of the American formation. At 3:55, the captain ordered an additional sonobuoy drop from an MH-60R helicopter already on ready alert on one of the destroyer's flight decks. The aircraft launched within minutes, cutting through the cold Nordic pre-dawn air, and seeded its buoys in a triangular pattern around the contact's estimated position. Data started coming in almost immediately. Estimated depth 300 feet, speed 4 knots, essentially a controlled drift. Heading, minor variation, as if the submarine were adjusting position, not fleeing, not closing aggressively, just watching. It's sitting right under the group's transit line, the ASW officer said, eyes moving between the tactical display and the depth chart. That's not a coincidence of positioning. It knew where we'd be. That was the first real red flag. A submarine that wanders off course out of curiosity is one thing. A submarine precisely positioned on the future transit line of a U.S. carrier is something else entirely. Inside CIC, the tactical picture flipped from routine monitoring to an active undersea threat problem. Every console refreshed, every operator straightened up. The ship didn't panic. Carriers never do. A carrier's strength isn't just steel and aircraft. It's thousands of sailors who know exactly what to do the moment danger shows up without warning. The captain gave the first containment order. Reduce formation speed. Adjust heading slightly. Nothing that looks evasive. Maintain safe distance from the contact. The tactic was simple. No sudden move that could read as provocation, but no passivity that would let the submarine creep any closer either. At 3:58, sonar picked up a subtle shift in the contact's acoustic signature, a slight increase in shaft rotation. Not a dramatic acceleration, just enough to suggest something was being adjusted aboard. Sub-track changing depth, slow ascent, the sonar operator reported. A Russian nuclear submarine climbing in depth near a U.S. carrier strike group is never a small detail. It could mean prepping for a closer approach, or it could just be tactical repositioning. In that moment,
The difference between the two possibilities came down to seconds. The tactical action officer crossed his arms, watching the numbers update on the screen. "It's Testamar coverage," he said flatly. That was exactly the nature of the game. Surface at the edge of detection, force a reaction, measure the response time, and gather valuable intel on how the American formation reacts to an unexpected contact. At 4:01, the captain ordered a second ASW helicopter prepped for launch. On the flight deck, still dark under red lighting, the crew ran to the aircraft, checking the lightweight torpedoes mounted under the fuselage, not for use, just for readiness. No weapon would fire without a direct order. But a second helicopter in the water would change the calculus for any submarine commander watching from below. At the same time, inside CIC, an electronic warfare technician picked up something new, a brief, nearly imperceptible emission from an underwater communication system. "Emission detected, pattern consistent with low-frequency comms," he reported. The submarine wasn't just observing, it was possibly transmitting data to another unit, maybe a second submarine, maybe a shore station, maybe a Russian reconnaissance satellite passing overhead at that exact moment. The captain took the report without changing expression. "Hold pasture. Every acoustic ping, every depth change, every electromagnetic emission was being stored, cataloged, turned into intelligence data. This was exactly the kind of encounter entire training pipelines were built to produce. Not a shot fired, but a complete behavioral file on an adversary." At 4:04, the nearest sonobuoy picked up something different, a faint mechanical clank followed by an abrupt shift in the acoustic signature. "Contact changing depth rapidly, descending," the sonar operator reported, his voice a shade tighter. The submarine was descending, not climbing. The immediate question was why. Two possibilities dominated the room. First, the submarine had detected the sonobuoy and was trying to break contact, dropping to greater depth where colder water would make tracking harder. Second, more troubling, the submarine was positioning for a closer approach, using the thermal layer to briefly hide before reappearing somewhere else.
"Hold contact. Don't lose the trail," the ASW officer ordered. The destroyer's hydrophones adjusted gain, trying to punch through the thermal layer that was starting to mask the submarine's echo. For a few tense seconds, the trace on the screen went unstable, the contact's line nearly vanishing into the background noise. That's when the captain made the call that would define the rest of the encounter. "Bring the P-8 Poseidon to launch readiness." The land-based maritime patrol aircraft, operating in coordination with the strike group, represented the final piece of the puzzle, a platform with surface radar, magnetic anomaly detection, and the ability to lay sonobuoy patterns far wider than any single helicopter could cover alone. At 4:07, the contact reappeared on the display, now deeper, but still within the formation's detection zone. "Contact reacquired, depth 460 feet, steady heading," sonar reported. The submarine hadn't escaped, it had simply repositioned. And that shift, by itself, revealed something important. It knew it was being tracked, and it stayed anyway. "This isn't a submarine trying to run," the tactical action officer said, looking at the captain. "This is a submarine trying to make a point." The statement hung in the air for a moment. A Russian submarine operating close enough to a U.S. carrier to be detected, remaining in place even after knowing it had been located, wasn't just testing the technical limits of the formation, it was sending a political message, a quiet reminder that Russian presence in those waters would not be ignored. The captain absorbed it without rushing. "Maintain active surveillance, no physical contact, keep logging." The posture stayed the same, ready but restrained. No weapon would be armed, no torpedo would be loaded. The goal wasn't to sink a submarine in peacetime, it was to make sure that if anything changed, the formation was already positioned to respond without hesitation. At 4:10, the P-8 Poseidon lifted off from an airbase in Norway, climbing fast to join the sensor network already blanketing the area. Once in range, it began laying its own sonobuoy pattern, dramatically expanding undersea coverage. The tactical picture, once limited to the destroyer's hydrophone range and the helicopter's buoy field, now stretched across a much wider area, and the Russian submarine, wherever it was, had less and less room to move without being seen. "Poseidon on station, coverage expanded," the Air Coordination Officer reported. Inside CIC, the tactical map now showed a much wider detection ring, overlapping the helicopter's buoys, the destroyer's hull sonar, and now the Poseidon's expanded pattern. The Russian submarine was, in effect, boxed in by a listening net that covered every possible direction of escape. At 4:13, something shifted in the contact's acoustic signature. Speed began dropping. 4 knots became 3, then 2. Contact slowing, possible thermal layer concealment maneuver, sonar reported. The submarine was trying to duck behind a colder water layer, a classic trick for evading active sonar detection. But with the sonobuoy net already spread wide, hiding completely was getting harder by the minute. The captain watched the encounter unfold with the same steady calm. Maintain the pattern, don't pull back coverage. There was no rush to force the submarine into the open. Patience in this kind of silent standoff almost always favors whoever has more sensors in the fight, and right now the American formation had far more eyes underwater than the lone Russian sub. At 4:16, a second contact briefly flickered on sonar, farther out, then vanished. Possible second submerged contact, classification indeterminate, the operator reported, cautious. The possibility of a second Russian submarine operating alongside the first significantly raised the complexity of the picture. Was it a coincidence of traffic or part of a coordinated operation? "Redirect the Poseidon to investigate the second contact," the captain ordered, tone unchanged. The aircraft adjusted its search pattern, dropping a fresh set of sonobuoys toward the possible second contact, while the helicopter and hull sonars kept tracking the original submarine. Over the next several minutes, the second contact never returned with enough clarity to confirm. "No reacquisition, classifying as unconfirmed," the ASW officer reported, after roughly 10 minutes of intensive search. It could have been a false echo, a misleading thermal layer, or an actual second submarine that chose to peel off in the face of the formation's fast response. Without confirmation, there was no way to know for sure, but the mere possibility had already been logged and passed up the chain. At 4:22, the original submarine began a slow climb again, its acoustic signature sharpening as it moved back toward the upper water column. "Contact ascending, depth 310 feet, sonar reported. The behavior looked almost deliberate, as if, having made its point, the submarine was preparing to slip away from the area with the same discretion it had arrived with. "Maintain distance, don't shadow it closely," the captain ordered. The intent wasn't to chase the submarine out of the area, it was to make sure it knew, beyond any doubt, that it had been detected, tracked, and cataloged from start to finish. At 4:26, the contact speed climbed steadily, 2 knots, then 4, then 6. Contact accelerating, heading northwest, opening distance from the formation, sonar reported, a faint note of relief in the operator's voice. The submarine was withdrawing, not abruptly, not in a panic, but calculated, exactly the way it had arrived. Inside CIC, nobody celebrated. The tactical action officer watched the contact's track slowly fade on the screen, keeping active surveillance up. "Continue tracking until contact loss is confirmed." Experience taught that a submarine that pulls away can come back, and letting the guard down too early is exactly the kind of mistake entire training programs exist to prevent. At 4:31, the MH-60R reported consistent loss of acoustic contact, with the submarine apparently moving beyond the effective range of the sonobuoys. The P-8 Poseidon confirmed the same pattern moments later, reporting no new returns in the direction the contact had gone. "Contact lost.
Last confirmed position logged, heading maintained, the Air Coordination Officer reported. The captain took the final report with the same composure he'd held through the entire encounter. Maintain heightened watch for another 30 minutes, then return to standard transit. There was no room for overconfidence. A submarine that disappears from detection range hasn't ceased to exist. It's simply stopped being visible. And for any professional Navy, that distinction matters. Over the following half hour, the formation held elevated watch, hull sonars continuing to sweep the depths, the Poseidon making a final wide pass over the area before heading back to base. No new contact appeared. Whatever the Russian submarine had come to do, it had done it and withdrawn without incident. At 5:03, the final report went up the chain of command. A Russian nuclear-powered submarine had approached the formation while it transited the Norwegian Sea, remaining detectable for roughly an hour and 10 minutes before withdrawing from the area without incident. No physical contact, no weapon fired, no direct protocol violation, just a silent test of capability, carried out and answered entirely underwater, far from the eyes of the world. What the Russian submarine didn't know, or maybe knew and simply didn't care, was that every second of its presence had been recorded. Every depth change, every speed variation, every brief electronic emission, all of it processed, cataloged, and filed away as part of an intelligence dossier that would keep being analyzed long after the submarine had vanished from the screen. Out on the dark water of the Norwegian Sea, the American formation resumed its original course, the carrier cutting through the swells with the same quiet discipline as always. The helicopter touched back down on the destroyer's flight deck. The Poseidon headed home to its coastal base, and somewhere beneath the surface, a Russian submarine continued on its own path, knowing exactly what the U.S. Navy already knew, that on that morning, underwater, it had been seen, heard, and understood from beginning to end.